Groups of people thinking in the same direction create energy informational structures, pendulums. These structures begin to develop independently and subject people to their laws. People do not realize that they are unwittingly acting in the interests of pendulums. How to wake up from a viscous obsession. Rent yourself out. Destructive pendulums. From childhood, we were taught to obey the will of others, to fulfill duties, to serve the fatherland, family, political party, company, state, idea, to anyone, but to yourself only in the last place. Everyone, to one degree or another, has a sense of obligation, responsibility, necessity, guilt. Each person, in one way or another, serves in various groups and organizations, family, club, educational institution, enterprise, political party, state, and so on. All these structures originate and develop when a separate group of people begins to think and act in the same direction. Then new people join, and the structure grows, gains strength, forces its members to follow the established rules, and can ultimately subjugate large sections of society. At the level of material implementation, the structure consists of people united by common goals and material objects such as buildings, structures, furniture, equipment, technology, and so on. But what is behind all this on an energetic level? Structure occurs when the thoughts of a group of people are directed in one direction, and therefore the parameters of mental energy are identical. The mental energy of individual people is united in a single flow. In this case, in the middle of the ocean of energy, a separate independent energy information structure is created, an energy pendulum. This structure begins to live its own life and subordinates the people involved in its creation to its laws. Why a pendulum? Because it swings the stronger the more people adherents feed it with their energy. Each pendulum has its own characteristic frequency of oscillation. For example, a swing can only be pushed by applying effort at a certain frequency. This frequency is called resonant. If the number of adherents of a pendulum decreases, its oscillations fade away. When there are no followers left, the pendulum will stop and the entity will die. Here are some examples of extinct pendulums: ancient pagan religions, stone tools, ancient weapons, old fashions, vinyl records, in other words, everything that used to be and is no longer used. You are probably surprised. Are these all really pendulums? Yes, any structures with their own attributes created by the mental energy of people are pendulums. In general, any living beings capable of emitting energy in one direction sooner or later create energy pendulums. Here are examples of pendulums in living nature: colonies of bacteria, populations of living creatures, schools of fish, herds of animals, forests, prairies, anthills, any more or less ordered and homogeneous structures of living organisms. Each individual living organism is itself an elementary pendulum, since it represents an energy unit. When a group of such single pendulums begins to oscillate in unison, a group pendulum is created. It stands above its followers as a superstructure, exists as a separate independent structure, and sets rules for its adherents in order to keep them together and gain new ones. Such a structure is independent in the sense that it develops independently, according to its own laws. Adherents do not realize that they are acting according to the laws of the pendulum, and not by choice. For example, the bureaucratic apparatus develops as an independent structure regardless of the will of individual officials. Of course, an influential official can make independent decisions, but these decisions cannot go against the laws of the system. Otherwise, such a devotee will be rejected. Even a singular person who is a pendulum is not always aware of his motivations. For example, an energy vampire. Any pendulum by its nature is destructive, since it takes away energy from its adherents and establishes its power over them. The destructiveness of the pendulum is manifested in the fact that it does not care about the fate of each individual adherent. The pendulum has only one goal: to receive the energy of the adherent, and whether this will benefit the adherent himself or not does not matter. A person who finds himself under the influence of the system is forced to build his life in accordance with its laws, otherwise it will chew him up and spit him out. Once under the influence of a destructive pendulum, you can easily ruin your entire life. It is usually difficult to escape without losses. If a person is lucky, he finds his place in the system and feels there like a fish in water. He, being a follower, gives energy to the pendulum, and it provides him with an environment for existence. As soon as a follower begins to violate the laws of structure, the frequency of his radiation no longer coincides with the resonant frequency of the pendulum. Not receiving energy, he throws out or destroys the obstinate follower. If a person is carried far from the lines favorable to him, then life in the structure of an alien pendulum turns into hard labor or simply a dull existence. Such a pendulum becomes purely destructive for the adherent. A person who falls under its influence loses freedom. He is forced to live by imposed laws and be a cog in a big mechanism, whether he likes it or not. A person can fall under the auspices of a pendulum and achieve outstanding results. Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, and the like are all favorites of destructive pendulums. But in any case, this pendulum does not care at all about the well-being of its followers, but only uses them for its own purposes. When Napoleon was asked if he had ever been truly happy, he counted only a few days of his life. The pendulum uses sophisticated methods to attract new adherents, who fly like moths to the light. How often do people, seduced by the advertising tricks of the pendulum, go far away from the happiness that was very close? They join the army and die. They enter an educational institution and in vain master a profession that is not theirs. They find an alien, but supposedly prestigious job and drown in a swamp of problems. They connect their lives with a stranger and then suffer. The activity of the pendulum very often leads to the destruction of the destinies of its adherents, although it tries to hide its motives with all sorts of virtuous masks. The main danger for a person who has succumbed to the influence of a destructive pendulum is that it takes its victim away from those lines of life where a person can find his happiness. Let us note its distinctive features. The pendulum feeds on the energy of its followers, and due to this increases its oscillations. The pendulum seeks to attract as many supporters as possible in order to receive as much energy as possible. The pendulum contrasts a group of its adherents with all other groups. This is who we are, and they are different bad. The pendulum aggressively accuses anyone who does not want to become a follower, and tries to either win over, or neutralize, or eliminate. The pendulum uses beautiful, attractive masks, hides behind high goals, plays on people's feelings in order to justify its actions and win as many adherents as possible. A pendulum is essentially an egregor, but that doesn't say everything. The concept of egregor does not reflect the entire complex of nuances of human interaction with energy informational entities. Pendulums play an immeasurably greater role in human life than is commonly believed. How a pendulum absorbs the energy of its adherents can be clearly illustrated in the following example. Imagine a filled stadium, an intense football match. Passions are running high. The fans are raging. Here is one player making an unforgivable mistake that leads to the defeat of the team. The player is hit by a storm of indignation from the fans. They are ready to tear him to pieces. Can you imagine what a massive negative energy falls on the head of the unfortunate person? From such a monstrous blow, he should simply die on the spot. But this does not happen. He is alive and well, although he is depressed by his guilt. Where did the negative energy directed at the player go? The pendulum took her. If this were not so, then the object of the crowd's hatred would die, and the idol would simply fly into the air. I do not undertake to judge whether the pendulum is an animate entity or whether it is simply an energy form. Yes, this does not have any significance for the transurfing technique. The main thing is to recognize the pendulum and not accept its play without benefit for yourself. It is very easy to recognize a destructive pendulum by one distinctive feature. He always competes with his own kind in the fight for people. The purpose of the pendulum is only one: to capture as many adherents as possible in order to obtain as much energy as possible. The more aggressive the pendulum acts in the struggle for adherents, the more destructive it is. That is, it poses a danger to the fate of an individual. It can be argued that there are charities, societies for the protection of nature, animals, and others. What's destructive about them? For you personally, it's that, whatever one may say, they feed on your energy, and they don't care about other people's happiness and well-being. They encourage you to be merciful to others while remaining indifferent to you. If this suits you, and you really feel happy doing this kind of work, then this can be considered a calling, and you have found your pendulum. But here, you need to be honest with yourself. Are you wearing the mask of a benefactor? Are you truly giving your energy and money to benefit others, or are you playing charity to make yourself look better? Destructive pendulums have weaned people from choosing their destiny. After all, if a person is free in his choice, he will gain independence. Then the pendulums will not attract him to their adherents. Our consciousness is so accustomed to the fact that fate is destiny, and it is really very difficult for us to believe in the possibility of simply choosing the fate we like best. It is beneficial for pendulums to keep followers under control, so they invent all sorts of ways to manipulate their servants. From the following presentation, it will become clear to you how they do this. Transurfing can also become a pendulum if you turn it into a cult, movement, or school. Different pendulums, of course, are destructive to varying degrees. Transurfing, even in the worst case, will be the least destructive, since it does not serve some general third-party purpose, but solely for the benefit of each individual. Therefore, such a pendulum would be very unusual, a kind of community of individualists occupied exclusively with their own destiny. By the way, here's your homework. What pendulums can be called constructive? But why am I telling you about this at all? Then to explain what it means to choose your destiny and how to do it. Be patient, dear reader. Everything is not so simple, but gradually the picture will begin to become clearer. Battle of the Pendulums. The main distinguishing feature of a destructive pendulum is that it aggressively seeks to destroy other pendulums in order to win people over to its side. To do this, he constantly pits his followers against strangers. We are like this, and they are different. Bad. People involved in this struggle lose their way and go towards false goals, which they mistakenly perceive as their own. This shows the destructiveness of pendulums. The struggle against foreign adherents is fruitless and leads to the destruction of lives, both your own and others. Let's take the extreme manifestation of the battle for adherents' war. To convince its adherents to go to war, the pendulum cites arguments that correspond to a specific historical era. The most primitive method that was used before is simply to order that what belongs to them be taken away from others. As society became more civilized, arguments took on a more refined form. One nation is declared superior, while others are inferior. The good goal is to raise these underdeveloped peoples to a higher level, and if they resist, to use force. Well, modern concepts of war look something like this. A bee's nest hangs on a tree in the forest. Wild bees live there, get their honey, and raise their babies. But then a pendulum approaches the nest and announces to its followers, "These are wild bees. They are very dangerous. So they must be destroyed, or at least, the nest must be destroyed. Don't believe me? Look." Then he begins to stir up this nest with a stick. The bees fly out and begin to sting the followers. And the pendulum triumphs. "See how aggressive they are. We must destroy them." No matter what justification slogans are used to cover up wars and revolutions, their essence is the same. This is a battle of pendulums for their adherents. The forms of battle may be different, but the only goal is to win as many followers as possible. New forces are a vital necessity for a pendulum. Without them, it will stop. So the battle of pendulums is a natural and inevitable struggle for existence. After wars and revolutions come less aggressive, but quite tough forms of battle. For example, the struggle for markets, rivalry between political parties, competition in the economy, all kinds of marketing, advertising campaigns, ideological propaganda, and so on. The human environment is built on pendulums, so all areas of activity are covered by competition. Rivalry occurs at all levels, from state disputes to competition between club teams and individuals. The new, unusual, incomprehensible always finds its way with difficulty. Why would this be? Is it really just inertia of thinking? The main reason is that the old pendulums do not benefit from the appearance of a newcomer who will win over adherents to his side. For example, internal combustion engines, which pollute the atmosphere of cities so much, could be a thing of the past long ago. After all, many alternative, environmentally friendly engine models have been developed. However, this threatens the death of the pendulums of oil corporations, and they are still very strong, so they will not allow some inventors to easily remove themselves from the scene. It gets to the point that these monsters literally buy up patents for new engine models and keep them secret, while announcing the low efficiency of the inventions. By implementing their structure at the material level, pendulums strengthen their position with financial resources, structures, equipment, and, of course, human resources. The favorites of pendulums are placed at the head of human pyramids. The favorites are leaders of all ranks, from small bosses to state presidents. They do not necessarily have to have particularly outstanding qualities. As a rule, they become adherents whose parameters fit most optimally into the structure of the pendulum. The favorite may feel that he has achieved impressive results in his life, thanks solely to his personal merits. To some extent, this is true, but most of the work of nominating your favorites is done by the self-organizing structure of the pendulum. If the favorite's parameters no longer meet the system's requirements, he is mercilessly eliminated. The battle of pendulums is destructive for their adherents in that it seems to the latter that, in fulfilling the highest will, they are acting according to their personal conviction. The personal beliefs of adherents are in most cases captured by pendulums. As soon as a person has tuned into its frequency, an interaction arises between him and the pendulum at the energy level. The frequency of emission of the adherent's mental energy is fixed and maintained by the energy of the pendulum. There is a kind of capture, a feedback loop. The adherent radiates at the resonant frequency of the pendulum, and the pendulum, in turn, also feeds a little energy into the adherent in order to maintain influence. At the level of material realization, we observe such interaction in the form of a familiar picture. For example, the pendulum of a political party conducts propaganda, hooks a follower, and gives him some energy in the form of a feeling of rightness, satisfaction, dignity, and significance. The adherent feels that he has control over the situation he can choose. In fact, they chose him and established control over him. Outwardly, this looks like the adherent's conviction that he is realizing his will. However, this will is artificially and imperceptibly imposed on him by a pendulum. A follower enters its information field communicates with others like him on hot topics, enters into an energetic connection, and thereby fixes his frequency. Then the adherent's expectations may be deceived. Thoughts appear against the former idol, and the radiation frequency falls out of the capture loop. The grip strength varies depending on the power of the pendulum. In some cases, the adherent is allowed to simply leave, while in others such a heretic may be deprived of his freedom or life. Frequency capture can be illustrated with this clear example. You hum a tune to yourself, but at that moment, you heard another loud music. Now, when you hear a different melody, it will be very difficult for you to continue playing the same tune to yourself. For the purposes of transurfing, it does not matter how the interaction occurs between the pendulum and the adherent at the energy level. We will explore this interaction using a simplified model in everyday representation. This is quite enough. No one will be able to explain in detail and accurately what and how is actually happening, because then the question will arise, what is meant by really? And so on, in accordance with the infinity of the process of cognition. This is a thankless job, so you'll have to be content with little. We should be glad that we are still able to understand something. Let's see how pendulums manipulate their followers. Strings of puppets. Let's ask ourselves, how can pendulums force their adherents to voluntarily give up energy? Big and Powerful, for example, can force its followers to act according to certain rules. But how do weak pendulums do this? When a person does not have the power to force another to do something, he uses reasonable arguments, persuasion, and promises. All these are weak methods inherent exclusively to human society, removed from natural forces. Pendulums also sometimes use such methods, but they also have much more powerful weapons. They are energy informational entities, therefore they obey and act in accordance with the powerful and immutable laws of the existence of this world. A person gives energy to a pendulum when he emits mental energy at its resonant frequency. To do this, a person does not have to consciously direct his thoughts in favor of the pendulum. As you yourself understand, most of people's thoughts and actions lie in the area of the unconscious. Pendulums take advantage of this property of the human psyche. They manage to receive energy not only from their followers, but also from ardent opponents. You can probably already guess how. Imagine a group of old women on a bench cursing what the country's government is doing. They are not fans of the government pendulum. They hate it for a variety of reasons. However, what is happening? Old women scold the government how incompetent, corrupt, cynical, and stupid it is. Thus, they intensely emit mental energy at the frequency of this pendulum. In fact, the pendulum doesn't care which side you swing it from. Both positive and negative energy are suitable for him. The main thing is that the radiation frequency is resonant. So, the main task of the pendulum is to touch a person to the quick, no matter how, just to occupy his thoughts. With the advent of mass media, pendulum techniques have become increasingly sophisticated. The person becomes deeply dependent. Have you noticed that news programs tend to be dominated by bad news? They evoke strong emotions: anxiety, fear, resentment, anger, hatred. The task of correspondence is to attract attention. The media, being themselves pendulums, are in the service of more powerful pendulums. The declared goal is free access to any information. The actual goal is the same tuning in all possible ways to the desired frequencies. One of the pendulum's favorite ways to access your energy is to throw you off balance. Having deviated from balance, you begin to swing at the frequency of the pendulum and thereby swing it. Let's say prices go up. You react negatively, you begin to be indignant, complain. exchange information with friends. A completely normal and adequate reaction. But this is exactly what the pendulum expects. You emit negative energy into the world around you at the frequency of the pendulum. It receives energy and swings even stronger. The situation gets worse. The strongest thread that a pendulum can pull you by is fear, the most ancient and powerful feeling. It does not matter what exactly you are afraid of, but if the fear is associated with any aspect of the pendulum, it will receive your energy. Anxiety and worry are already weaker, but still quite strong threads. These feelings very well record the emission of mental energy at the frequency of the pendulum. If you're worried about something, it's hard to focus on anything else. Guilt is also one of the widest channels through which the pendulum pumps energy out of you. It has been imposed on us since childhood. This is a very convenient method of manipulation. If you are guilty, you must do what I say. It is very uncomfortable to live with a feeling of guilt, so they try to get rid of it. But in what way? To be punished or to work off the guilt? Both imply submission, obedience, and the work of thoughts in a certain direction. A sense of duty is a special case of a feeling of guilt. Must means obliged to do something, guilty of doing something. As a result, the guilty, both true and false, wander with their heads bowed and bring their tribute to the pendulum in the form of energy. Induced, suggestible feelings of guilt are the favorite weapon of manipulators, and we will return to it later. Of particular note are all kinds of psychological complexes of people. Inferiority complex. I have an unattractive appearance. I have no abilities or talents. I lack intelligence or wit. I do not know how to communicate with people. I am unworthy. Guilt complex. I have done something wrong. Everyone condemns me. I have to bear my cross. Warrior complex. I have to be tough. I declare war on myself and everyone around me. I will fight for my place in the sun. I will take what I have by force. Truth-seeking complex. I will prove at any cost that I am right, and I will prove to others that they are wrong. These and other complexes are personal keys to the energy of individuals. The pendulum touching a person's nerve intensively pumps energy out of him. You yourself can continue the list of threads by which pendulums pull their puppets: justice, pride, vanity, honor, love, hatred, greed, generosity, curiosity, interest, hunger, and other feelings and needs. Feelings and interest allow you to record the flow of thoughts in a certain direction. If a topic evokes neither interest nor emotion, then it is very difficult to concentrate on it. Therefore, pendulums capture the flow of thoughts, affecting a person's feelings and needs. As a rule, people react in a standard way to negative external stimuli. Negative news causes dissatisfaction. Disturbing news causes a reaction of anxiety or fear. Resentment causes hostility, and so on. Habits serve as the starting lever for triggering the capture mechanism. For example, the habit of getting irritated or worried about minor reasons, responding to provocation. In general, responding with a negative reaction to a negative stimulus. A person may realize that negative thoughts and actions do not bring anything good, but as usual, he makes old mistakes. Thus, habits often create problems and cause ineffectiveness, and are difficult to break. They are an illusion of comfort. A person trusts more what has been familiar for a long time. Anything new is cause for concern. The old familiar has already proven itself in experience. It's like an old chair that you sit in to relax after work. Maybe the new one is more convenient, but the old one is more comfortable. Comfort is characterized by such concepts as convenience, trust, positive experience, predictability. The new has these qualities to a much lesser extent, so it takes considerable time for a new habit to become an old one. So, in general terms, we have examined the methods of influencing people with pendulums. Can a person get rid of the influence of a pendulum? We will talk further about ways of liberation. However, it often happens that someone rebels and openly opposes the pendulum that has enslaved him. In such a fight, a person always loses. A pendulum can only be defeated by another pendulum. One person cannot do anything. If he gets out of obedience and enters into a fight, he will only lose energy and at best will be thrown out of the system and at worst crushed. An adherent who dares to violate the rules established by the pendulum is declared an outlaw. Outwardly, this manifests itself as condemnation for an action. In fact, the guilt lies not in the act itself, but in the fact that the adherent has become disobedient. That is, he has stopped supplying energy to the pendulum. Why does the sword not cut off a guilty head? Because a person who has accepted the feeling of guilt is completely ready to submit to the power of the pendulum. For a pendulum, the adherent's repentance for the act does not matter. What matters is the restoration of lost control. The pendulum will immediately become kinder if you give it the opportunity to manipulate you. Well, if the culprit does not submit, then he can be eliminated, since there is nothing more to take from him. The true motives of a pendulum, as a rule, are veiled by moral principles. They say that someone who has repented of what they have done is no longer such a villain. You yourself can easily distinguish where the moral principle operates and where the interests of the system are affected if you always remember what pendulums are and what their true goals are.